Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to do a basic OPVL analysis for the subject of history. So, first what I want to focus on is why do we have to do an OPVL analysis? Well, history as a subject is a science. It's a social science, but it still has some of the basic elements of a scientific subject, one of which is the scientific method. The scientific method has various steps, among which is experimentation, or the step where you make an experiment to support your hypothesis and to reach a conclusion. In history, however, we can't do experiments because we can't reconstruct historical events. Therefore, in the scientific method used in history, there is no experiment. Instead, this step is replaced by a reconstruction of sources. And the way that we reconstruct historical sources is by analyzing them and figuring out if they are relevant to our historical investigation or not. And we do this through analysis. Step 1 of an OPVL analysis is the origin. So, the origin deals basically with the context of a source, and the context should answer the questions when was the source written, at what date and time, where, in which place in the world, and by who. So basically in the origin you're given an introduction to your source. You're figuring out where does it come from and why is it there in the first place, who wrote it, and where and when. Step 2 of the OPVL analysis is the purpose. The purpose relies on two things: the reason of the source and the audience of the source. So the reason has to do with the question why. Why was the source written? Why was it created? Does it have any hidden purposes? Do you have to read between the lines to interpret what the source is aiming to? It also deals with, as I said, the audience. That's to whom is the source written, to whom is the source directed, what persons or what group of persons or what group of people or what individual was the source addressed to, and why was it addressed to those persons or to that person in particular. So as you can see, the purpose is this. The meaning is the same as the word itself. Is the question why? Why is the source there? Why is it available for you to analyze? Why is it available for you to use as a historical reference? To do this, you have to know the previous step, the origin. You have to know who wrote it, and then in the purpose, you determine why did they write it and to whom did they write it. Okay, now we're at step 3, which is the value of the source. This is the one where you retake all of the previous variables that you have determined in the previous steps and you sort them out to get sort of like a map of the process of your analysis. Now, as you can see, we have 4 variables here: the origin, the author, the audience, and the purpose. Now, in each of these, we have 2 possible categories or types into which the source can fit. And we're going to see each of them right now. So, the origin of the source can be primary or secondary. Primary means it's written or said by an eyewitness or an active participant during the historical event that it's relating. And secondary means that it's a second-hand interpretation. The source comes from after the event that it's telling you about. The person who wrote it or the person who said it wasn't there in the first place. So, for example, a primary letter can be a transcript. A primary source can be sort of like a transcript of a speech given in a certain historical event, and a secondary source can be a history textbook telling you about that speech. Okay, now we move on to the author. The author of a source can be official or non-official. Official means that the author is vested with a high-ranking position, is a social leader, is a political leader, is essentially someone that could have an impact as an expert in the field of your historical investigation. you need to determine if the person who wrote the source or who set the source is somebody that you could consider as a reliable source for your investigation. And well, if they are, then the source is official, and if they're not, then the source is not official. Then the audience, the source can be either private or public. This is pretty obvious. Private is if the source was intended only for a particular individual or a particular group of people, a small group of people. And public is if the source was available to the general public, to everyone who wanted to see it, since it was published. Because maybe you could consider, there might be some confusion here. For example, a letter is a private source because when it was written, it was intended only for one person. However, somebody doing an OPVL analysis might consider the letter public because where they got it from, maybe it's a public source. But still, you have to consider the original purpose of the source. When it was written, to whom was it intended to be written? Who was it intended to reach? And well, this ties directly to the purpose, in which the source can be either direct or indirect. Now here you have to consider the purpose of your own investigation, of your own analysis. Is the source a direct source of information for what you're analyzing, what you're investigating? Does the source have a purpose that is to directly inform you of historical facts, or is it not a historical source, and as such you have to read between the lines and interpret so as to collect the information, so to speak? For example, a history book is a direct source because its purpose is to inform directly of historical information, whereas a letter, taking it from the previous example, is an indirect source because when the person wrote it, they weren't intending their letter to be a source of historical information. However, the information is there, and so the source can still be considered valid and useful. However, it is not direct. Now, as you can see, these variables are all tied together to the first two steps of the OPVL analysis. We have that the origin and the author, well, we saw those in the origin part of the analysis, and the audience and the purpose variables, well, we saw them in step number 2, which is the purpose step. And now we are at the last step of the OPVL analysis, which is the limitations. Now, these limitations are to be established after the origin, the purpose, and the value of the source have been already identified. And the limitations deal basically with the question, why not? Why couldn't the source be completely trusted? Why could the source be biased? Or why could it be only partial truth and therefore not be considered a completely reliable source of information for whatever you're investigating? Now here there are 3 possible types of limitations. The first one are the limitations that the source itself shows. For example, maybe the source is translated. It was written in a different language than that in which you are reading it, and therefore some ideas could be lost in translation. Perhaps it was edited, or perhaps it's the source that you're analyzing is only a fragment of an original document, and therefore may not contain the complete information that you might need to form an objective analysis. The limitations also pertain to the author and the context. Now here, the historical context, the social context, and political context of the time when the author lived and when the source was written affect the source directly. The author is obviously affected by their historical context, but they could also be affected by their nationality, their level of income, their religion, their education, and because of all these variables, they could provide a subjective, they obviously provide a subjective view of the historical event or the historical source that they wrote or that they said something about. Here, well, obviously all sources are a bit subjective because of their author. What you have to do is to be very careful in determining why. You have to be very meticulous in this step to find the limitations of the source you're analyzing. And well, as I mentioned before, the context limitations have to do with the historical context of of the source, the time when it was written, what was happening politically, socially at the time, to whom was it written also applies here in the context, and the intentions of the source that relate to its place in time also relate directly to the limitations or the biases that the historical context or the time context, how this can influence on the source itself. Well, now I think that we're basically done. As you can see, an OPVL is not really that hard to do. You just have to know, you just have to be able to define each step, to break it down, and it's basically very simple. So good luck with your analysis, and thank you for watching.